The JMC is complete. How detailed was the discussion about cuts?
Сегодня был очень такой важный.
Well, today was actually a very important JMMC meeting. We have looked at the previous month, we have assessed the market situation, but more importantly, we have studied in detail a number of various scenarios of how the market can develop. And I think that many of those scenarios show that in the first quarter, maybe first half of next year, we're looking at quite a high likelihood of production surplus.
Никаких решений не было принято сегодня.
We have not made any final decisions today, including in relation to the topic which you've mentioned, production cuts, because we believe that we need to still take some time to actually analyze the situation in more detail to be able to clear uncertainties.
Я поясню почему.
And I will explain why. As early as 1 month ago, everybody has been talking about the necessity to boost production because people are afraid there will be deficit.
Я хочу сказать, что мы не должны.
And I think that we should not rush decisions. We should not be driven by immediate volatility. We should sit down and make fundamental decisions.
But the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia saw their demand, their nominations for December decline by 500,000 barrels. On the demand side, are you seeing a similar decline in nominations, decline in demand?
Я думаю, что нужно смотреть не только декабрь месяц, но и
I think that we should not only focus ourselves on 1 month. We should be looking at November, December. Basically, we should be looking at the dynamics of demand.
And is the dynamics of Russian demand for Russian oil declining, rising, or stable?
У нас более стабильный спрос, поскольку
The demand for our crude is fairly stable, but historically so, because our relations are mainly governed by long-term contracts and not so much by spot sales.
When the discussion about cuts comes, will it be in the December OPEC meeting when there will be a much fuller discussion about cuts?
ну, вы знаете, я бы сейчас
You know, I would not want to focus purely on production cuts. I mean, this is not the ultimate goal, to cut or not to cut. I would like to say that I think we have to wait and see, how the market is unfolding, because our ultimate goal is market stability. And as I have stated on numerous occasions, and His Excellency Mr. Al-Falek stated that there is a toolbox which allows us to both increase or decrease production, and we have shown during the past 2 years that we can use it either way, depending on what the goal is, and the goal is market stability.
на мой взгляд, показывает интерес
And I think that based on the interest and questions we're receiving from journalists and the market in regard to cuts, it seems to me that the demand for this information is a bit over-exaggerated. Let's wait and see.
Однако это не исключает того, что такие меры тоже могут быть рассмотрены.
But to sum it up, I would like to say that we're not excluding cuts.
Но я бы не акцентировал внимание только на это.
But I just would not want to pinpoint or put an accent specifically or only on this measure.
To close the conversation on cuts, Saudi Arabia are saying they're prepared to lead. How much is Russia prepared to take? 100,000, 200,000? What is Mr. Novak's red line in terms of accepting some cuts?
Я вообще не хотел бы сейчас называть какие-то цифры.
I don't think I would like to mention any numbers yet or set some expectations. I mean, as you can see from the past 2 years, we have always had a very pragmatic approach to this topic. We have always been acting in the interests of Russia and of the market, and we will continue doing so.
Is step one a freeze?
Опции могут быть разные.
I would like to say that we have a number of options. And as I've mentioned before, we can increase, decrease, or keep production flat depending on what needs to be done. So we would be basing our decisions on current goals and current state of the market.
How big do you think the surplus could be? When you look at the data that you have going into 2019, just how big could the surplus be?
I think the situation in 2019 would differ greatly when you compare the beginning of the year and the end of the year. So if we're going to be looking at the first half of 2019, then we could see significant surplus of output. But when we move to the summer months and to the later part of the year, I think the market would be in more balanced shape and possibly even going into deficit.
Is the biggest threat to oil prices U.S. shale production? It's at a 98-year high. Is that the biggest threat to stability?
Я не считаю, что это риск. Я считаю, что это...
I don't think it's a risk, to be honest. It's one of the sources of supply. It's one of the ways and methods to satisfy growing demand, and it's completely in the market. So that's how I would view it.
Понятно, что мы в балансе.
I think it just means that in our supply and demand projections, we now have to pay special attention to forecasts of US shale oil production growth.
I asked you about December production just a short time ago. In terms of November, what can you tell me in terms of what you're producing right now in November, the level of Russian production right now in November?
По моим прогнозам, добыча в ноябре будет на уровне октября месяца, примерно на этом уровне.
What we're seeing now, and based on our forecast for November, I mean, I think that production will be flat compared to October.
And just to clarify, in December, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia said that they saw a drop in nominations and a drop in demand. Mr. Novak, what's the Russian target output for December?
Ну, в настоящее время мы исходим из того, что
We're currently basing our forecasts and assumptions on the following: that we're going to be at plateau level for a couple of months, around November, October levels.